Many years ago, I had a dream about opening a club which would only open its doors between the months of October and April. A warm, welcoming place with roaring log fires and cozy nooks where you could sit with your friends and chat about things that interest you. Well, I couldn't even begin to afford to open a club, so the dream died. But its passing is commemorated by this podcast, presenting, for the winter months, a series of cozy chats with friends old and new on topics of interest. Welcome to the October Club. Welcome to a brand new series of the October Club. 7 new cozy chats to keep you entertained over those cold winter months. For this first episode, I'll be welcoming back my old friend, Ben Hudson. You might remember him from the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy episode in the last series. This time, we'll be discussing the British comedy institutions Vic Reeves and Bob Mortimer. Hello, Ben. Welcome back to the October Club, a new series of the October Club. This will be the first episode.
Feel a great burden on my shoulders now.
Well, yeah. We're going to be talking about Reeves and Mortimer. I thought I'd put that first, get this show off to a proper brassy tart of a start.
A brassy tart of an opening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we should probably, I mean, we were kind of discussing this before we started talking. Yeah, we were discussing this through telepathy before we started
50
talking.
years ago, before we were talking.
Yeah, we were discussing this before we started recording, that Reeves and Mortimer, or Vic and Bob, as we shall probably refer to them, they're not really known outside the UK. So if anybody's listening to this in the USA or Australia, and I know we do have some listeners there, A, why are you listening to this? Because you're not going to understand any of it. And B, we should probably explain who they are. I mean, they're a British comedy duo. Started off in the early 90s, or probably late 80s, but
I think we became aware of them in the early 90s, but they were going in the 80s,
yeah,
pubs
yeah.
in London.
Very sort of surreal comedy. They're not really from any comedy background, are they? Like,
I think the problem with them is they're extremely hard to define.
yeah, yeah,
They are not, everything I say here is said with the utmost joy and love for them, but
yeah.
they are not talented people. You know, they can't act. They can't sing. They're just two blokes who find each other funny.
Yes,
Who anybody who wants to get in on the joke
yeah,
will find it funny as well.
yeah,
But you know, the ultimate Vic and Bob mom. We've talked about this recently,
yeah,
and I think it works well in the context of talking about Americans and Australians and
yeah.
whoever else trying to figure out who Vic and Bob were. Was when they went to the Montreal Comedy Festival,
Oh, yes, I remember that.
Just for
Yeah,
Laughs Festival, and went out on stage and an entire theatre full of people primed for comedy
yeah,
just sat like stunned mullets, just looking at these two blokes talking about the lucky carpet and not getting the joke. And there's a sort of a little bit of laughter in the audience, but it's almost
yeah,
an uneasy laughter. Like, should we be laughing at this? And you can see simultaneously Vic and Bob on stage, both realizing they're bombing
yeah,
and loving it, loving the
yeah,
fact that they're probably the only two people in that theater who actually get what they're doing and like what they're
yeah,
doing. And
yeah,
it's almost like, we get the joke, you don't get the joke, so the joke's on you.
yeah.
And I think that sums up an awful lot of their comedy.
Yeah, because that was at a time that they were massive in the
Yeah,
UK. I mean, they were enormous, and I mean, they. I was kind of looking at the figures. I was kind of looking at the dates that they did certain things, and I hadn't until you start thinking about it, you don't realize that their rise to fame was just meteoric, wasn't it? I mean, it was so fast.
it's a strange comparison to draw, but if you look at Oasis,
Yeah,
Oasis came from absolutely nowhere and was
yeah,
suddenly playing arenas and then stadiums. They bypassed arenas, they went straight to stadiums over here.
yeah,
But they would go over to America and they'd be playing small halls.
yeah.
And Vic and Bob very similar. They went from, I don't know how long there was between the two times we saw them at the Students' Union at Newcastle University
Yeah.
and then at the City Hall at Newcastle.
Yeah.
But it wasn't a big gap between the two.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember seeing them at the Students' Union and being, as we walked in, we're standing on one side of a curtain, they're standing on the other side of a curtain having a drink before they go on stage.
Yeah.
It was that small.
Yeah. I mean that student union thing was it was between the two series of the Reeves Big Night Out, which was
Yeah.
their breakthrough show. So they'd only done 6 episodes on TV, and
Mm.
they already had this massive cult following with students, and
Yeah.
people,
And us feeling very old because we were probably
shit
two
shovelers
years
like
older
us
than
who weren't students,
them.
but they're still into it, you know. But yeah, I remember that show because if I remember rightly, my memory's terrible these days, but I kind of remember it as the layout as being kind of in the round where you were kind of sitting slightly sort of round the
I
stage.
think it was just that the stage was built into the venue.
Yeah,
So you were kind of sitting around the stage that they had erected. But I remember that there was a curtain down the side of the stage
yeah, yeah,
and you came in past this curtain. And I remember seeing through a gap in the curtain and thinking, that's them. They're
yeah,
literally their backstage area is almost in the audience.
yeah, yeah,
And they're waiting to go on stage. This is just too small. This is just too weird for me.
yeah.
Um, and I actually had a friend who I worked with a few years later who had been at one of the recordings of the original show, the
All
original
right.
TV show,
Yeah, yeah,
um, in London or wherever it was recorded. And
yeah,
he told me the story, and this again sums up Vic and Bob to me.
yeah,
Him and his mate who went down to see the show
yeah,
were in the pub over the road from the studio where they were recording it,
yeah,
having a beer and naturally doing the Sunderland thing of having that last beer just in time to run across the street
yeah,
and get there for the start of the show.
yeah,
And Vic and Bob were at the next table having their last beer so they could
yeah,
just in time to run across the road and get into the theatre for the
yeah,
recording. And then you watch the TV show and realise that those guys were now half cut having
yeah,
a final beer just before recording began. That's the mentality, and it fits because you just realise how they were just having a laugh.
yeah. When they made it big, they were wanted for all the Red Nose Day and all these kind of events and things on TV,
Mm.
and they'd have them on doing their little bit. But invariably, they put them on late, and you're just thinking
Mm.
that's the worst thing you could do because they on some of them they were clearly absolutely
Yeah,
hammered. I
absolutely.
mean,
You'll be hearing from our solicitors in the
yeah,
morning. Yeah,
I think that's the one, isn't it? I can't remember what it was on. I think it was Red Nose Day. But
that
they
I
just
think
can't
that was
get
on that.
anything right. They can
Yeah,
barely speak.
yeah,
It's
they were
incredible.
crossed like Gary Cross, like across your arm, bra.
Yeah.
Yeah, irate. Yes, irate, like irates
I,
in Lambeth. They
yeah.
got there in the end.
But that again, like you say, that was just them making themselves laugh.
Yeah,
They almost didn't care that there was an audience there.
I think they positively enjoyed other people not getting the joke.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, I remember on another little tangent. I remember I used to work at a school,
Yeah.
and when I was working there, the school band got into a competition in Birmingham, a
Yeah.
music competition in Birmingham, and we all went down on a coach together.
Yeah.
And me and this other guy who was also very much into Vic and Bob,
Yeah.
basically around about Teesside, the
Hmm.
two of us slipped into Donald and Davy Stott, and we kept it up
Yeah.
from Teesside all the way to Birmingham, and the kids were going nuts. They were just screaming at us to stop, and we couldn't stop because it was so much fun.
Yeah.
And I think Vic and Bob probably had that same attitude of like, we don't care if nobody else gets this. We
Yeah.
don't care how much we've had to drink. As long as we're having fun,
Yeah.
jet clears,
Yeah.
we're just going to be a very happy pair of idiots.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's interesting that if you see them now, I saw them being interviewed recently
Yeah.
on YouTube, and even now, just in an interview, they're just trying to make each other laugh.
Yes.
just trying to trip each other up. There's an interview, and Vic just kept on talking about how they first met. And every
Yeah,
time they went back with a question of how they first met, Vic would come up with another stupid idea of how they first met. And
yeah,
Bob would be trying to keep in the same story.
yeah, yeah.
And I
I mean,
love it.
yeah, there is an element in interviews that they're not only trying to make themselves laugh, but deliberately trying to sort of trip up the person that's interviewing them.
No,
Because there's that one, there was a one, they were on kids' TV. It was like
I know
going
exactly
live
which
or
one you're talking
something,
about. Yeah.
which they should never have really had them on there.
No,
But
it was Philip Schofield. I'm sure they were talking to Philip
yeah,
Schofield.
and they say something to Bob um, about
Bob talking about
yeah,
wanting to play football and being a
yeah,
very talented football, but unfortunately he was riddled with arthritis.
and like you can see Philip Schofield like he kind of half laughs and like, oh, is this
Right?
funny? Is
Like,
this a joke?
what, am am I supposed? Is this true? Is this? Is he riddled with arthritis? Is that what the knee pads are
Yeah.
about?
Yeah, that's one of those moments where you can see he's kind of thrown it in there as a kind of
Mm.
I'm going to say this and see how he see how he reacts.
And it'll be fun.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So that first series, the Victory's Big Night Out, I remember. I'll see how you remember this, but I remember we used to, had very similar sense of humor, and we used to
Mm.
recommend shows to each other.
We'd recognise them as well.
We'd recognize them and then
Yeah.
recommend them.
Yes.
And you had recommended Nightingales to me, the surreal sitcom.
Yeah.
Um, and you'd seen the first episode of that, and I hadn't, and we both got into that. And the way I remember it is I had seen the first episode of Big Night Out, and I don't think you had, and I recommended it to you. I remember
Yeah.
trying to describe it to you and
Yeah.
vaguely describing the man with the stick. And there's this bloke, and he's got a stick, and he's
Yeah.
wearing a
I,
paper
I
helmet.
remember. I remember when it happened. I remember me. I couldn't actually remember that it was Nightingales. I remember that I recommended something to you,
Yeah,
and that you came back with Vic and Bob, and
yeah,
would, like you say, stumbling around trying to figure out how to describe this, and just kept on saying, "But it was really funny. It was. I can't tell you anything that was funny about it, but it was really funny." And I remember sitting there thinking, "Really?
yeah,
I'll take your word for it because usually we're on the same page, but
yeah,
it doesn't sound like anything at all that I've ever seen in my life.
yeah.
So
That's it,
I'll
though. It's
take your word for it."
impossible to describe, isn't it? It's
And I
impossible.
think the first one I saw started with him walking out singing "Born Free,"
Yeah,
or it might have been "Scary Monsters."
yeah,
But he came out singing, and I was like, "All right, all right, I'm in for this.
yeah,
I'll see what's going on."
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, that was Nightingales that you recommended to me because I'd looked for something
sounds
else
right. Yeah,
I was doing. I looked recently, and those two shows came on the air within weeks of each other. They
that
were
was a
actually
good one.
running at the same time, Nightingales and Vickery's Big Night Out. So that was a good.
That was a really good month.
Yeah,
And again, in terms of comedy traveling,
yeah,
I've shown my Nightingales to my wife,
yeah,
and she gets it.
yeah,
I've shown little bits to my son, and he gets it.
yeah.
I've shown them Vic and Bob, and
They don't get it.
very little. Again, Donald and Davy stock works,
Yeah,
and I've been known to go off into Donald and Davy stock in the house,
yeah,
and I'll just start ranting
yeah,
and talking sense, and that works.
yeah,
But nothing else from Vic and Bob. I talk about damn wide fish
yeah,
and the mackerel being a damn wide fish. Nobody gets it.
yeah,
I speak to they want my shoe,
yeah.
want my shoe, and they don't get it. Um,
Thing is, I think even
every Christmas, the eggnog comes out, and I'm like, it's too much egg, not enough nog. Nobody gets it.
I think even in the UK though, that there were kind of levels of people getting it.
Mm,
Because I know that I met people around the time in the 90s who were desperately into it, but you could see there were elements of it that confused them that they didn't get. Sometimes quite northeastern things,
Mm,
they would refer to something northeastern, which obviously
mm,
we would get being from well, we're not from Teesside, but we would get
yeah.
it being northeastern, and some people from down south would kind of not quite they'd be laughing and they'd be kidding. I don't really know why that's funny, but
Mm.
yeah,
It was just, it was a strange show.
yeah, yeah.
Um, as were all the other.
What I didn't realize until quite recently is that even by the time they were doing Big Night Out on television, they were kind of bored with that format. They were, because they'd been doing it as a live
Mm,
thing in London prior to that. And they were all, once they got the taste of fame, they were like, right, we want to move on. Or they were almost instantly, we want to move on to something else
mm,
now. And that apparently that, I don't know if you remember at the end of the last episode of Big Night Out, the man with the stick is he's drunk and he's firing a gun,
yeah,
and Vic is shot, and that was supposed to be them killing off the character of Vic
Vic
Reeves,
Reeves, yeah,
Britain's top light entertainer and singer.
Anthony,
So, that was supposed to be the end of him, but obviously he sort of Jim Moyer kept on being Vic Reeves for a
yeah,
lot of years. So
very strange. I think the other thing that's interesting about them, going back to what I've sort of talked about them being non-specific talent. They are funny, but they are
yeah,
not. They're just two blokes.
yeah,
Is if you watch almost everything they've done, certainly everything I've seen of them trying to interact with anybody else,
yes,
whether it's trying to act or Vic's little attempt at the four Yorkshiremen
yes, yeah,
sketch, which I'm sure you've seen.
yeah,
They don't perform well with other people, and other people don't perform well with them. The only
yeah,
time I've ever seen anybody kind of working with them was when, again, the Stott brothers were
yeah.
interviewing people
It's,
on was it Bang Bang or was it the smell of Reeves and Mortimer? Bang Bang, wasn't it?
it was Bang Bang. I think the
Yeah.
interviews, yeah,
When they're interviewing people, and that works because those people don't know what the hell's going on, so they're just trying to react and trying to thing, and then being left alone on the set,
yeah,
or and they don't know how to react, so they're
yes,
reacting naturally. But anybody who actually tries to interact with them,
yeah,
it doesn't work
yeah, yeah,
because they're on their own planet.
yeah. I mean, when they moved to the BBC and do the smell of Reeves and Mortimer and leave behind all the sort of trappings of Big Night Out, that's in a way that's a kind of sort of purer version of their comedy, isn't it? Because they're kind of saying, yeah, we're
I think
tired
so.
of
Yeah, they're saying that the previous thing was a stage show,
yeah,
and it was the limitations of what you can do on a stage. Now we've got
yeah,
a TV show and a
yeah,
budget,
yeah,
and we can actually go out and shoot things, and we can get a little bit more experimental, which
yeah,
maybe is limited on stage.
yeah. It's not in front of, I don't think it was in front of an audience. It doesn't look like it was shot in front of an
Doesn't
audience.
look like it.
Yeah,
It looks like there's a lot of editing involved with
yeah,
frying pans and stuff that I don't know if you could pull off in front
yeah,
of an audience.
yeah. It's interesting though, like they leave behind everything of Big Night Out, and the only characters that kind of appear in everything are Donald and Davy Stott that appear in all their sketch shows.
Because why would you leave them alone?
So they're
Yeah.
obviously greatly amused by Donald and Davy because they just keep coming back.
Yeah. And why wouldn't you be? I mean,
Yeah,
what's not to love about them? I mean, again, to anybody who's unfortunate enough to listen to this without knowing what we're talking about,
yeah,
Donald and Davy Stott are two kilt wearing,
yeah,
giant shoe wearing,
yeah,
Teesside
yeah,
morons
yeah.
with electrical tape mustaches
Yes,
that keep coming off
and
and
partial sort of bald caps.
crazy
Yeah,
wigs. Yeah.
and they're
They just
talking
talk like
really
a lot
high
of
voices.
absolutely stupid, like,
Yes,
you're calling me redundant.
I know. Have you
I
brought
don't know
your
what's going on, like,
have you brought your marzipan?
but don't call marzipan, man. Marzipan's private between man and his
Oh,
wife. Sorry, but and
yeah,
it's how could you not be amused by just being able to go and do that for as long as you want,
yeah. You
knowing
get
you're going to
paid
get
for
paid
it.
for doing it,
Yeah,
and that there's going to be some funny stuff in there
yeah,
or not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, they do. They do literally. Donald and Davy start appear in every one. I checked this because I was thinking, surely they can't be in all of them, but they are. They're in every one of the sketch shows. They may even be in Shooting Stars. I'm not sure somewhere, but
Recall them on Shooting Stars.
yeah,
I don't know if I've seen all of Shooting Stars, and I've seen most of it because I did find them on YouTube after I came over here.
yeah. I mean the we should talk about that. I mean the first version of Shooting Stars would have been while you were still in this country. That was like 95 to 97.
Yeah,
Um, Shooting Stars was a we'll call it a quiz
go
show.
on, go on, try and explain it.
We'll call it a quiz show. Was it a quiz show? It's just sort of organized chaos, really.
Yeah.
Disorganized chaos. Just chaos. Yeah, it's where it was panel game where they'd have kind of panelists on. Again, that was a thing where I think most of the panelists didn't know what the hell was happening.
Mm,
You know, Vic and Bob, and to a lesser extent, Mark Lamar and Ulrika Johnson knew what was happening. The other panelists didn't have a clue.
yeah.
Um,
And I've seen them talking about it. I've seen Mark and Ulrika talking about it, and both
yeah,
saying that the trick was you just had to let them do whatever they were going to do
yeah,
and accept that there was nothing you could do that was going
yeah,
to interfere with them doing their thing.
yes,
Um, and also the thing that Matt Lucas, when he was being George Dawes,
yeah,
again, for those who haven't seen it, he's a baby, he's a big baby, which
yeah.
was a grown man in a romper suit
Playing the
playing the
drums.
drums.
Yeah,
Again, Vic, one of the few people who did actually interact well with Vic and Bob, because apparently he just said, I want to have a drum kit, and they just left him to it.
yeah,
So when they handed over to Matt Lucas, they didn't know what he was going to do.
yeah,
So he would do his bit. And when it cut back to them and Bob was often pissing himself laughing,
yeah,
it was because Bob didn't know what Matt was about to do.
yes,
And so he's enjoying being in the same position that he puts other people in.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. And it was very good. And I have seen the updated one with the guy who took over from him,
yeah,
who's okay, but it was a completely different vibe.
yeah. Well, I think Shooting Stars became a bit of a kind of a bit of a burden for them eventually, when they brought it back
Mm,
because it went off the air for like just over a decade and then came back.
mm,
And I think it was there's this element with them that a bit like what they used to say about Spike Milligan, that the television sort of knew they wanted them. They knew they were geniuses. They knew what they wanted them, but they didn't know what to do with them.
yeah.
But Shooting Stars was arguably their in the public consciousness their biggest thing, and the BBC were like, "Oh well, we just want more and more of that," which
It was
they,
safe.
yeah,
It was very safe because you could put a couple of celebrities on there to get sort of a different level of interest
yeah,
and a different bunch of viewers in, and you knew what Vic and Bob were going to do. There was a format to it, so you knew you weren't
yeah,
going to have 5 minutes where they were slamming car doors into trees
yes,
or, or having two idiots walking around on the seafront
yeah,
looking at arcades.
yeah,
It was just going to be two blokes doing their bit, then hand over to the celebrity. There was a bit of eye candy there. There was a bit of fun and
yeah,
games, and half an hour gone, boom, safe TV.
yeah,
Whereas if you actually gave them a sketch show or a sitcom
yeah,
and said, go and do what you want, you could get half an hour of something very strange.
yeah,
And by
yeah,
then it would be too late to say no because you've already signed them up to a contract, given them the money to go and make the show.
yeah,
And I
yeah,
think that probably scared producers
yeah,
because they didn't care. They clearly don't care when you see them being interviewed. It's clearly like we've been paid for 35 years
yeah,
or whatever it is to just ask about,
yes,
you know?
yeah.
And why would we do anything different?
Yeah, I don't know how much truth there is in this, but I remember reading somewhere that apparently when they came back to do more Shooting Stars, it was a deal with the BBC. They wanted to do another sketch show called HMS Reeves and Mortimer. And the BBC had said, "Oh yeah, we'll let you do that if you do more Shooting Stars." So they
Mm,
kind of did it, but the sketch show never happened for some reason.
Mm,
Um,
very possible.
yeah, so I always think of it as like Peter Sellers with Inspector Clouseau, where towards the end of his
Yeah,
career, he's finding it impossible to get anything new done because the studio were constantly going, "Are you going to do some more Inspector Clouseau?"
yeah, yeah,
He's kind of victim of his own success, sort of thing. And there's a
yeah,
little element of that with Shooting Stars, where they kind of you can tell by the end that they're not that interested in it.
yeah. They were very much everything they do looks very much based on how much fun can we have.
Yes,
So when they start going through the motions and they're just doing something for the sake of doing it,
yeah,
it's gonna come over.
yeah. I know towards the end of Shooting Stars as well, they were bringing in other gag writers, and you just think, oh well. Until that point, it's literally just been the two of
Yeah.
them writing everything. You can tell they're not interested if they're bringing in other gag writers.
Mm.
Yeah, it's a shame, but I mean, it was always entertaining. Shooting Stars, and
Yeah, I think everything I've seen of theirs, and there is that dividing line of the millennium
yeah,
where I haven't seen much of their stuff after 2000 because it just became very hard to access from over here.
yeah,
But everything, certainly in the 90s, whether it was Big Night Out or Smell of Reeves and Mortimer or Bang Bang or the live
yeah,
shows or even the Weekenders,
yeah,
was just, it was clearly just two blokes doing what they wanted to do
yeah,
and
yeah,
what they could get away with doing and laughing that they were being paid to do this.
yeah.
Um,
I don't know if you remember
and
it.
then
Would have been just before you went over there. They put them on a prime time show called Families at War, which was it was on a
I have a
Saturday
vague
night.
memory of it. I think I don't know whether it's a false memory or not, but I have a vague memory that there was some talk about the generation game,
Yeah, yeah,
and that then Families at War showed up,
yeah,
and I half wonder whether they'd thought about giving them the generation game and then
yeah,
just pulled back a little bit from that. Though maybe
yeah,
not an established property that has some value.
yeah.
Let's give them something else and see if they destroy that.
Yeah, I mean, it was. I remember watching it and finding it really funny, but it wasn't Saturday night material, and you could
No,
practically hear BBC executives kind of going, "Oh, this is what we want on a
this
Saturday
is
night."
not the stuff for us.
Johnny G, superior denim leisure wear, whatever the occasion. Here's what our customers say.
Alright, Kev. It's a sad occasion here at Uncle Jack's funeral, but I must say, you've got a dash in your Geordie jeans. You seem to have stolen the shirt.
I know,
If only Uncle Jack was here to see how tight they are.
I know. They're especially tight around the ass.
I wish I was wearing Geordie jeans.
Johnny Jeans.
Would you have seen any of Randall and Hopkirk, or was that after you'd defected?
I think I've seen an episode of it, but I don't know
Yeah,
whether it was after I escaped or if it
yeah,
was when I was still, in country.
because it's right on the kind of. I mean, it was 2000, I think.
I think I'd seen a copy, but I have a feeling I'm going to seem incredibly ungrateful here. I have a feeling you gave me a copy of the whole series,
Yeah,
and that I watched the first one and went, nah,
yeah,
nah, I don't think I
yeah,
can invest in watching that. I've got a
yeah,
big thing. We're going to go off on a big tangent here.
yeah,
I've got a big thing about bad acting
yeah,
at the moment. And as I said, I can't get beyond them being them.
yeah, yeah,
Um, and even if I say good actors doing
yeah,
an overly stylized performance,
yeah,
I can't get into it.
yeah,
If they're in a sketch, they're fine
yeah,
because they're not required to be great. They just have to be funny.
yeah.
But as soon as they start trying to act, it's like, I know you're not Randall.
They've become a lot better now, I think, when they're in things kind of separately. That's possibly the thing. They were probably still trying to make each other laugh.
Maybe separate. They're trying to each other. Maybe sober. You
Yeah,
know,
But
Um,
yeah, with Radler and Hopkirk, there's definitely this element. I mean, Bob Mortimer in particular has to do a few kind of serious bits. And he's
mm,
good in the comedy bits, as you would expect. But when he tries to do the serious bits, he's like a kind of amdram actor. He's kind of not very good.
you also wonder with some people whether they actually are confident in their own ability to do it.
Well, yeah, I think there was probably an element of that. Yeah,
I'm a bit silly. I don't want to act because people will say I'm acting, and then it'll be a bit farty.
yeah,
Whereas, when they get a bit older and realize, hey, I'm allowed to do this, and I don't have to get a laugh. So I can actually take myself seriously, whether that's something with Bob, who looks like somebody who just wants to,
yeah,
you know, have fun.
yeah, yeah. I think Bob looks more out of place in Randall and Hopkirk than Vic does.
Yeah. But Vicky's playing a dead man, though, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean he's
Yeah.
having
So,
more fun with it. I think Bob looks more out of place, and I mean it's. I watched them recently, and it looks quite dated now, just the way it's filmed. Yeah, and it came in for a lot of criticism. I don't think it's that bad, but it came in for a lot of criticism at the
yeah.
time. Yeah. I remember saying to people, because that was what, 2000 to 2002 or something, and I remember saying to people when Doctor Who was coming back, a lot
Yeah.
of people I know who were Doctor Who fans had criticized Randall and Hopkirk for not being like the original one. And I
Yeah.
remember saying to them, you do realize the production style of this is exactly how Doctor Who is going to be when that comes back.
Yeah.
And I pretty much say I was right. It was the same sort of, although Doctor Who was a better series. Um,
Mm.
it was made in
Well,
the same
because they
way.
avoided the fatal mistake that I think both of us would have made.
Casting
And the
Vic and
fatal
Bob.
mistake that they avoided was they didn't get Vic and Bob to play the Doctor and as an assistant,
Yeah.
which would have been marvelous, but would have killed Doctor Who.
Yes. Yeah. But I mean it's telling that that's the only time they tried something like that, a kind of action adventure thing.
Mm.
They did other kind of sitcom type stuff, but they never tried that again. So
There's something to be said from learning from your mistakes.
yeah. I mean when we mentioned the Weekenders earlier on, which was just a
Yes.
one-off thing. That was
Yeah.
really good. I would have liked to have seen a series of that.
And he called himself Jim in that as well,
Yeah.
which ties into the whole killing of Vic Reeves, the Vic Reeves persona.
Yeah, yeah, because I think I'm kind of looking at I've got some notes here of what years things were in because my memory is terrible. And that was kind of the last gasp at Channel 4, I think, before they kind of went to the BBC. So that would have been after Big Night, after they'd killed Vic Reeves off
Yeah,
in Big Night Out. So. But Bob was particularly, like you were saying on live stuff, Bob was constantly calling him Jim anyway.
absolutely. Yeah, and
It was slipping out
pretty
all the
much everything
time.
except for Big Night Out. They
Yeah,
kept the discipline going on Big Night Out,
yeah,
except the live shows
yeah,
when they'd obviously had a few more to drink,
yeah,
and Bob was perhaps a little bit more relaxed and not quite as interested in the script.
yeah.
Um,
I did really like that. I mean, the live shows when they did the big live. I don't remember that much about the content of the one at the Students' Union. The
I seem to remember that the one at the Students' Union was just very, very much a very loose version of the kind of thing they did on the TV show.
Yeah, yeah,
Didn't really go beyond anything. Whereas the later one, the actual Big Night Out,
yeah,
they pushed it a little bit further with a
yeah.
few other bits and pieces, with a few bigger bits and pieces. And I think that was as good a live show as we ever saw. Bear chicken combinations, bashing BMXs with buckets. You can't start a show better than that.
My abiding memory of the university one, the student union one, is they went off for a bit, didn't they? Probably to have a drink. And
Yeah.
Simon Day was a sort of support act as Tommy
Now
Cockles.
that was on the Puce tour.
Was it? I thought it was on
Yeah,
the.
that was Puce. That was at
Say my memory is
City Hall.
terrible.
Yeah, no, I remember that. And he came out and he did his thing, and then was, is there a fire?
He went down like a lead balloon.
Yeah, and people were
'Cause-
going off to get their food and their drinks,
yeah, I don't think
and he was worried there was a fire.
in fairness to him, I don't think it was his. fault. I think it was his only sin was not being Reeves and Mortimer. People had come
Oh,
here to see Vic and Bob.
yeah,
That's what they
and
wanted to see.
what he was doing wasn't anything they were familiar with
Yeah,
or we
yeah,
were familiar with.
yeah.
When Uncle I've forgotten
Peter,
his name now.
Uncle
I'm going
Peter.
Uncle Peter when he came out and started talking about Wolfpack
Yeah,
and don't send me back to the dark place.
yeah,
Everybody knew who he was. Everybody knew his routine.
yeah,
They hung around for that. But when he came out, he was just doing this strange monologue.
yeah,
And it wasn't, you didn't know where it was going. And it was obviously just so Vic and Bob could go and have a breather.
yeah, yeah.
So let's go and have a breather. Let's go and get a drink. Which was strange. But yeah, that was definitely Puce.
All right, yeah,
No, I don't think there was any support act at the Students' Union. I think they were way too small. It was just on and off.
yeah,
Do
yeah.
their 60 minutes or 90 minutes or whatever it was and get out of Dodge.
The Puce tour was, they were really confident by then.
Yeah.
And Vic had a number one hit record with
Yeah.
Dizzy, and
Yeah.
did they? I can't remember. Were the Wonder Stuff there when we saw
The
it?
night we saw them,
Yeah,
they shot the two shows on the Friday and the Saturday or whatever
yeah.
it was. We saw it on the first night, and on the second night the Wonder Stuff were there.
All right, so we were
But
there the night that they weren't there.
we saw it
Yeah,
with a backing track,
yeah,
and the audience the next night saw it with the thing, and the video was the two nights combined. And I always remember it because a mate of mine had, I don't know how fast this had happened, but video piracy in the 1990s, ladies and gentlemen, before the
yeah.
internet.
Yes,
He had already seen the show that somebody had taped, camera up a sleeve
yeah.
in Ipswich or something. And he had seen the show. And the day we were going to the show, he was like, I've seen the video. And I rocked up and there was cameras there. And I was like, well, didn't they record this down at Ipswich? And it was only like
Yeah.
a month later that I said, it was recorded in Newcastle and you saw it from Ipswich. And he was like, yeah, it was on a pirate. And I was like,
All right.
that makes sense. But
Yeah,
how weird would that show have been recorded on a pirate camera? Because it was a surreal enough experience to start with.
yeah, yeah.
You add in muffled sound and a camera that's not level, this would have been very weird.
I mean, Vic's pop career, it was predominantly Vic, although Bob was on a few
Yeah.
things.
Bob had his mandolin.
Yes, yeah. It was kind of it was unusual because he's quite like successful. I mean, like I say, had a number one,
Hmm.
and I think I'm a Believer got to a number three or something with EMF.
Yeah. But again, it was all, it's like it's two or three hit records
Yeah,
because it was Vic at the peak of his
yeah,
victim.
yeah,
And they were fun records, but they weren't good
yeah.
records, you
Yeah,
know.
you do wonder whether kind of it must have been made a bit of money, so
Oh,
you do kind of wonder whether he was kind of just like, yeah, I've had enough of that now. I don't I don't want to do anymore. I was tired of being a pop star. I want to go back to
it would be interesting to actually look at their sales figures and how much the drop off was from the two big
yeah,
ones to other things that may have been released and not noticed,
yeah,
and that perhaps the record company said, you've had enough,
yeah,
you know.
yeah,
Um, he was
yeah.
perfect at what he did.
There was them being on top of the pops as well was another example of the kind of producers not really
Mm,
knowing to kind of grab them when they were sober. Because
yes,
they're just throwing themselves. I don't know if you remember, Bob starts sticking his head in there was a washing machine on stage. And
yeah.
Bob starts sticking his head in a washing machine randomly.
That's a long tradition on Top of the Pops, though, of people usually doing it on the basis that they were objecting to not being allowed to play
Yes.
live.
Yeah.
In Vic and Bob's case, I think that was probably a good thing that they weren't allowed to play live.
Yes.
But the number of people over the years who've been on Top of the Pops and have done something just to prove a point.
Yeah.
There were a whole podcast about that. There's so many of those.
Yeah. Yeah, I did. I mean, I really like that album, I Will Cure You, when it
Curious,
came out.
yes, yeah.
I really liked his Christmas Abide With Me, which that didn't do that well. So, so
It
that's
didn't go
possibly
down
why.
well. I was always fond of I Remember Punk Rock.
Yes.
The nicest tribute to a punk rock era in the history of music.
Yeah. Yeah.
You couldn't have got less punk rock if you'd tried.
The whistling interlude on that is Jonathan Ross,
There you go.
who was
Who
the
who we owe who we owe everything to for Vic and Bug.
yeah, because it was he kind of well, did he discover them? Yeah, he probably did discover them.
More or less.
Yeah.
Supposedly they had this. Well, I mean, they were obviously on the way to being discovered. They had their theatre show that they were doing,
Yeah.
and Jonathan Ross was one of the people who kept on going down to see it, and obviously felt it worked for him.
Yeah.
Let's put them on the TV,
Yeah.
and did. Which,
Yeah.
the production company was his company that produced all the Big Night
Yeah.
Out. So
Channel X. Yeah.
yeah, so got a lot to answer for as Jonathan Ross.
I seem to remember, I can't remember what it was. It was on some other, before Big Night Out. There was some other,
They were on a big quiz show, and
yeah, it was
Vic
like a kind of
Vic was
Celebrity
floating
Squares
around on
type
a
thing, wasn't it?
yeah,
Yeah.
and Vic spent half the night floating around on a cable,
Yeah.
um, and clearly drunk.
Yeah. Because I had no idea who he was at that time. And then kind of after the Big Night Out, I kind of looked back and thought, oh, that was that guy.
Yeah, yeah,
Which is, I think, is what you often do when somebody sort of becomes famous. You kind of look back and you go, "Oh, that was him on that thing." Didn't know who that was at the
yeah.
time. So yeah, I mean, after like I say, after the 2000 cutoff point when you had gone to Australia, I mean,
The dark times.
I
Yeah,
did feel like there was quite a bit of stuff where they were just like trying stuff and didn't really, there was a thing that they did with Steve Coogan called the All-Star Comedy Show,
yeah.
which the second series was called Monkey Trousers. It's had its moments. It had some good sketches in, but it just wasn't. It didn't feel like them in their prime. You know what I mean?
Again, what I was saying before about if you are working with Vic and Bob,
Yeah.
you're never going to be the same as Vic and Bob.
No. No.
And once they start surrounding themselves, once an act starts surrounding themselves with other acts, that to me suggests that act doesn't want to do the heavy lifting anymore.
Yeah.
Like you're saying, Vic and Bob would go out and they would do a show, and it was all Vic and Bob. It was clearly
Yeah.
nobody else had been involved in that. It was
Yeah.
completely from their minds. You could tell it was from their minds because it was just wrong.
Yeah.
Nobody else thinks that way.
Yeah.
And then when they go on and suddenly they're getting other people in and saying, hey, you do a bit here, you do a bit there. Simon Day popping up on Puce
Yeah.
and doing his monologue doesn't work.
Yeah.
Uncle Peter, I don't know how much of that's him and how much of that's Vic and Bob, you know,
Yeah.
but it fits. It's a rare occasion of something fitting.
Yeah.
So when they start, I haven't seen Monkey Trousers or
Yeah.
the
Well, I did.
show.
I mean, that says something about it that I didn't watch all of it. So,
Yeah, because it's not them. It's like if
yeah.
you want to watch the Fast Show, guys, you watch the Fast Show.
Yeah.
If you want to watch, I've forgotten his name now, Steve Coogan, you watch the Steve Coogan
Yeah.
show. If you want to watch Vic and Bob, you watch Vic and Bob. And I don't
Yeah.
think the flavors mix.
No.
Huh?
No.
You rarely have chips in a pizza. You know,
Yeah.
you love chips, you love pizza, but nobody goes out and buys pizza and chips. Well, some people do, but they're
Yeah.
idiots. Um, and it's that kind of, it doesn't sit right.
Yeah.
And that sort of smacks of the whole sort of, we've had our glory period where
Yeah.
we've absolutely dominated. Now we can't be bothered. And Vic
Yeah.
does look very much like somebody who's just like, we can't be bothered.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Um,
they did about the last thing they did, as a comedy duo, they did a kind of a comeback of Big Night Out, didn't they? Called Vic and Bob's Big Night Out.
yeah,
And it's odd to watch it because it's kind of like it's almost like a kind of great it's like a farewell tour. It's like a greatest hits tour because it's
yeah,
got bits of Big Night Out, but a lot of it is also kind of smell of Reeves and Mortimer and Bang Bang it's Reeves and Mortimer. Stylistically, it's all those things
yeah.
meshed together, and it was all right, but it did feel like they were kind of going, yeah, well, we'll call it a day now. So
Yeah.
I'm not sure if they'll do more sketch show stuff again together.
No, and again, watching the interview with them that I saw fairly recently.
Yeah.
I don't know how recent the interview was, but they sort of addressed the fact that they don't really, other than when they get together for these interviews,
Yeah. Yeah.
they don't really mix with each other. They don't really hang out with each other.
Yeah.
They don't work together. They have no great desire to write together.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
it's obviously just where they are now. But you wouldn't want them at age whatever they are now. They were born in the
Yes.
50s, so yeah, you wouldn't want them at 60 whatever they are,
Yeah.
still trying to be Vic and Bob,
Yeah.
still trying to do the big night out, because it would have kind of that sad Monty
Yeah.
Python's last tour
Yeah.
element of people just showing up to listen to the old sketches.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Better
think
that they keep on going. I like watching Bob on Would I Lie to You?
yes. Yeah.
Just watching that you just realize when you watch him on that was
Yeah.
Bob.
Yeah.
When they were doing these big night out, that was genuinely the way Bob was,
Yes.
and this genuinely the way Vic was. They're not really going far from who they are,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
which is awesome to think
Yeah.
that he actually lived his life the way he was on stage.
Yeah. Yeah. They're
Um,
kind of doing what, but the both of them are kind of doing what they're interested in now, aren't they? So,
mm,
you've got Bob with his fishing and Vic with his
yeah,
birds. Fish and birds,
yeah,
that's what they're doing now.
there you
Um
go. Yeah. I haven't. Literally the only things I've seen them on is I've seen Bob doing the "Would I Lie to You," and I've seen Vic on the Cats Does Countdown,
yeah. Yeah.
which he shows up on. Probably not the best show for him to be on because it doesn't show him in the best light.
Yes. No.
Um,
No.
but Bob is surreal.
Yeah.
It just
I'm not
reiterates the idea that he was probably the more talented of the two in terms of variety.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I always get the impression that Vic would have gone off on some kind of Bob kind of kept him slightly in check. He would
yeah,
have gone off into areas that kind of where people would have almost sort of stopped laughing and were like, "Is this funny?" Whereas
yeah,
kind of Bob slightly kind of keeps him in. All right, we'll t keep this more as a joke.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Vic was more artsy, I would have thought. Yeah, yeah,
I've got his Sun Boiled Onions book up here somewhere.
yeah,
Um, he is a very surreal person.
yes,
I think Bob's a little bit more grounded in the real world,
yeah,
and that goes back when you look at their early years. That it was, you know, Vic was doing these live shows,
yeah,
and Bob's just a local solicitor
yes,
working for the council, going and watching the shows, and then sort of going, "Oh, I'll join in, I'll do my bit like everybody else does," and
yeah,
then he was doing his bits better than anybody else was. So
yeah,
keep him around. It kind of adds up that Vic just had no interest in being in the real world. He just wanted to get
yeah.
up and do his big night out. Whereas Bob was in the real world.
It's interesting. It makes you wonder. We were talking there about Jonathan Ross, sort of discovering them. It makes you wonder whether if it had been left up to them, whether they really had any ambition, whether they would have just kept doing that at the show at the
Yeah,
Goldsmiths Tavern for
yeah.
the rest of their life, whether it was they needed that kick up the arse from Jonathan Ross to go, no, no, you should
Mm.
go on television.
But that just ties back into the whole how English comedy seems to have worked in the 80s and 90s. How it just seemed to be about who was in the right pub at the right time,
Yeah, yeah,
or who was in the right place, right time has been the secret of everything. But I remember Stephen Fry's autobiography talking about how he discovered Paul Whitehouse and Charlie Higgs and Paul Whitehouse and a couple of the other guys
yeah,
literally went round to his house to do a plastering job.
yeah,
And whilst they were doing the job, they were just being themselves and being
yeah,
funny. And he thought they were hilarious, and he told them that they were being hilarious. And they said, "Oh, you should meet our friend. He's the funny one."
yeah,
And the friend they were talking about was Harry Enfield, and that led to them also Harry Enfield being on Friday Night Live or whatever it was
yeah,
with them from knowing Stephen Fry, and that led to Whitehouse and all of that getting the Fast Show. And it's all just one thing that just one thing
yeah,
leads on to the next, leads on to the next.
yeah,
Jonathan Ross discovering himself.
Yeah.
Was the other one, which is he was gonna do a chat show and he couldn't find a host. He was gonna produce the chat show and he couldn't find a
Yeah.
host and he just gave up and says, "I'll do it."
Yeah.
And then you look at his whole career is based off one decision out of frustration that he couldn't find a host for his chat show,
Yeah.
so he just did his own.
Yeah.
And you think if he had found somebody,
Yeah. Yeah.
would his entire career have been as a TV producer?
Yeah.
Would he
Yeah.
have never been on TV?
Yeah. It's interesting.
Narrow little things in TV, isn't it?
Yeah. Talking about Stephen Fry there, I have to mention that I've almost certainly said this to you in the past, but I went with my cousin Neil to the Edinburgh Fringe and we saw this Hysteria show, which was
Yeah,
a AIDS benefit show, which had loads of people, had Eddie Izzard and Stephen Fry was organising it and all that. And that they had Vic and Bob on, and again they put them on late-ish in the show where they were
yeah,
hammered, and they were doing this kind of running joke about oh, I should see backstage there's this big fucking duck. And this was kind of a running gag, and some of the other comedians picked it up,
yeah,
and were putting it in their thing. They'd obviously all been chatting backstage. But then at the end of the show, Stephen Fry comes on and does this very serious monologue about all the, you know, people in show business who've died of AIDS, and he reads this list out, and all the other acts are on stage standing there very solemn. And at the end of this list, Bob just pipes up, and a big fucking duck. And God, you could see on Stephen Fry's face that he just wasn't happy.
yeah,
And I mean, I've read about this since that apparently didn't talk to them for a couple of years or something after that.
yeah. Uh,
But you
yeah, you
you,
see
you,
that?
you can imagine Bob kind of going, "Should I say that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna do it anyway."
Like the greatest Bob story is the Michael Jackson one.
Yeah.
Do you remember the Michael Jackson story?
No, what was that?
When Michael Jackson was on the Brits
Yeah,
in 90, whatever it was,
yeah.
and Jarvis Cocker
Oh
decided
yeah,
that he was just being too full of himself. So Jarvis Cocker went up on the stage and flapped about a bit and waved his arse at Michael Jackson
yeah,
and was immediately grabbed by security and taken backstage. And legal action was being threatened, and all kinds of things were going on.
yeah, yeah,
And he needed a solicitor,
yeah.
and Bob was there, having worked for the local council 10 years before,
Yeah.
out of his box because he'd been drinking all night at the Brits with Jarvis Cocker. So he went backstage and sort of sat down and tried to be Jarvis Cocker's legal representative with all of Michael Jackson's big lawyers sitting in the room
Yeah.
threatening to sue him for ruining Michael's show. And Bob just sort of sitting there looking at Jarvis and going, "I don't know any of this, mate. I don't know any of these things." Just I can just see Bob
Yeah.
sitting there drunk,
Yeah.
realizing that, yeah, I'm a solicitor, but I'm not a solicitor. I
Yeah.
work for the council.
I'm out of my depth here.
I'm a little bit out of my depth, but hey, got the qualifications.
Yeah. So I mean it's interesting. Most of the comedians we kind of grew up with, had been around for ages before, we came around. But
Hmm.
with Vic and Bob, there's this thing that we've kind of watched their career, you know, throughout our adult life, from unknown to being,
There's many comedians who we've watched go from
yeah,
nowhere to somewhere,
yeah,
but they fade into all the rest
yeah, yeah,
because it's the same thing.
yeah,
There's not there's not many. If you try and pull them out of your head, there's not many comedians who are genuinely on a different planet
yeah,
in terms of they don't
yeah,
think the same way normal people think.
yeah. There's nobody else.
Harry Hill had his little moment post Vic Reeves.
Yeah,
He would never have got a break without Vic Reeves being there.
yeah,
But he's the only other one who's kind of jumps to mind as being that genuinely surreal, not
yeah,
operating. But again, he was a little bit clever with it. Whereas
yeah,
Vic and Bob weren't trying to be clever. They
yeah,
were literally just, what's going to make me laugh?
yeah,
I'll hit Bob with a frying pan, you know? And what's going to make Bob laugh if he hits me back with an even bigger frying pan,
yeah,
and then I've got a flat face.
yeah. And like you
Um,
say, everybody else. joins in the joke. They're not interested whether other people join in the joke, but
Yeah,
they
yeah.
do.
If they like it, fantastic. We're going to like it, and I don't think there's anybody else when you go through comedy before or since
Yeah,
who was on that completely separate level
yeah,
of just we're having a laugh. We don't
yeah.
care.
Okay, so I think that's a good place to wrap it up. Thank you, Ben, for joining me again.
Been a pleasure.
And just one thing, did you ever did you ever let those rabbits out?
Oh, you had to mention the rabbits, didn't you? You had to mention my nefarious
Well,
scheme with the rabbits.
sorry, like
Couldn't let it lie, could you?
I would have let it lie.
You would have let it lie, but you couldn't let it lie.
That was Reeves and Mortimer. I'd like to thank my friend Ben Hudson again for joining me this evening. Why not come back to the October Club in another 4 weeks, where you can hear me talking to Richard Napper about the unexplained. That was the October Club, presented by Paul Ferry with special guest star Ben Hudson. The title theme was written and performed by Peter Faulkner, and the show was edited and produced by Paul Ferry. This was a Mosaic production.